Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ade Solaru, founder and chairman of SupplierGateway, and I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you to the premiere episode of our brand new Expert Exchange webinar series. Here at SupplierGateway, we are committed to bringing you direct insights from the brightest minds shaping the future of supply chain, procurement, and supplier engagement. This series is designed to spotlight the voices of industry leaders and offer you actionable strategies that you can use in your day-to-day operations. And we are kicking things off in a big way. Today, I am honored to be joined by none other than Rosemary Coates, a globally recognized supply chain executive, best-selling author, and trusted advisor on manufacturing and trade policy. Rosemary brings decades of experience and a powerful perspective on some of the most pressing challenges facing supply chain professionals today. In this episode, we'll dive into topics that are top of mind for many of you: the evolving impact of global import tariffs, how to make reshoring a reality in your organization, and the role of inclusive sourcing strategies in building a more resilient supply chain. We'll also share real-world tips on how to identify high-quality suppliers even amid the turbulence of today's economic environment. So whether you are a supply chain strategist, procurement leader, or just curious about what's next in global sourcing, you are in the right place. So let's get started. Rosemary, I know the audience is here to learn from you, so I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about your background and experience with this most timely and topical subject of reshoring.
Sure. Thank you very much, Adi. I'm pleased to be here.
My
I'm
pleasure.
going to page down to my background slide, a little bit of information about me. I'm the executive director of the Reshoring Institute. We're a 501c3 nonprofit and nonpartisan organization. And I'm also the president of Blue Silk Consulting, where we do global supply chain consulting. I've
Mhm.
been doing this kind of work about 35 years or so, and I've worked with over 80 supply chain clients worldwide. My background, I have a bachelor's degree in logistics from Arizona State and an MBA focused on finance and operations from the University of San Diego. I've also written 5 books on supply chain management, and the reason why I point this out is not because we're trying to advertise them, uh, because you don't make any money on writing business books. But in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a picture of Legal Blacksmith.
Mhm.
This is a book I wrote together with an attorney a couple of years ago. I do expert witness work, and I often get involved in cases that involve procurement and contracting. And in this one case, I was working with an attorney in Cleveland, Sarah Rathke. And one night at dinner during the trial, she said to me, "Let's write a book together." And so we did. We ended up spending about 18 months writing this book. I wrote the first part of each chapter, and she wrote the back part of each chapter, which has the legal clauses that
Mm.
you should be incorporating into your contracts. So it's really kind of a handy desk reference, and one that I'm proud of, and I think is really quite helpful. I've also written a book about negotiations and sourcing and manufacturing in China. Okay, a little bit background on the Reshoring Institute.
Mhm.
As I mentioned, we're nonprofit and nonpartisan. We provide research and consulting for companies that are bringing manufacturing back to America. We hire student interns, and that's 50% of our mission is to hire and train mostly graduate student interns about the manufacturing world. And the reason why is because over the past 20 years or so, there's been hardly any focus on teaching students about operations or manufacturing. And sometimes that includes sourcing as well. So we took on a mission to provide internships and to give these students an opportunity to learn. So they work 100 paid hours for us in a semester, and they help us with our research and our small consulting projects. You can see at the bottom there, we now have affiliations with 19 universities across the U.S., and we add more as we go along. But we have quite a broad range and are able to select interns and bring them up to speed rather fast, and then they can help us go from there. A little bit of background: in the 90s and 2000s, offshoring to China was the economic strategy of most manufacturers. Sourcing in China became commonplace. And you can see here a picture of the Forbidden City in Beijing. I took this picture. I'm proud of this one. And Beijing is one of the hot spots, or the area around Beijing, for sourcing, as well as the Pearl River Valley in southern China, just north and west of Hong Kong, and the Shanghai area, the greater metro area. So these are places that companies started sourcing and manufacturing over the past 25 years. This is a picture of a factory that I visited, excuse me, outside of Beijing. I was working for an automotive supplier in Beijing, and one morning I got to work at the building in downtown Beijing, and the purchasing manager said to me they were going out to see a supplier at a machine shop. Did I want to come with them? And I said, of course. That's one of my favorite things, is to visit factories, especially in China. They're quite interesting. So we arrived at this factory. It was in the Fifth Ring Road outside of Beijing. And if you've been there, you know there are ring roads around the city. So this one was the farthest out, about an hour and a half from downtown Beijing. And when we got there, the factory manager met us at the door and said he had to take a conference call and he'd be back in about 15 minutes. So just go ahead and look around while we were waiting, which, you know, if you've ever been in a factory, you know you're never allowed to go into a factory unescorted. But he said, just go ahead and look around. So you can see my colleagues are in the center aisle. They're standing there talking to one of the machinists. And as we walked down this aisle, I noticed a few things that sort of jumped out as red flags to me. First of all, see the yellow lines? You go into a factory, you're always told,
can't cross the yellow line.
That's right.
Can't cross the yellow line.
Don't cross the yellow lines. And that's because it's for your own safety. But you can barely see this yellow line, and they didn't really care. That my colleagues from the Chinese company were walking in and out of the machines and so forth. Look at the guy standing at the machine at the bottom right. He's operating a metal cutting machine, and there were filings and so forth that were kind of flying off this machine. He has no lead apron. He has no goggles on, no hard hat, no leather gloves, no toe protection. And I was a little bit taken aback by that, I think, you know, just being there. Now, the one thing I should tell you also is that my colleagues at this company told me that this was one of the very best machine shops that they had ever worked with, that they were producing very high quality parts. It was well run and so forth. But what I was seeing was a lot of safety issues and so forth. The guy at that machine was making $3.63 an hour. And the same, we did a comparison with other machinists around the world. In the US, that same machinist would have been making $26.10 an hour. And in Europe, $32 and I think 3 cents an hour. So, you know, quite a bit of differential in terms of wages. Now, taking all this together, this is the reason why so many companies started outsourcing to China. They had capabilities. They were producing and are producing high quality parts. The cost of operation is very low, especially since they have safety regulations, but they don't necessarily follow them. They don't provide safety equipment and so forth, which keeps the cost very low. The cost for the land and production is very low. They have lots of room in China, and they don't pay the workers very much. Now, wages are rising in China, so that differential is a little bit different these days. But even so, you can see by comparison, the overall cost to produce products was considerably lower than it would be in a place like the US or Western Europe. So, as a result of that, the sourcing and manufacturing in China grew by leaps and bounds because America was hungry for buying products that were inexpensive. And so that's how over 25 years this whole situation of sourcing and manufacturing in China bloomed into an enormous trade situation for the US. Well, fast forward to today, and what we have today is an attempt to even out that trade imbalance by applying tariffs, particularly on Chinese imports.
Right.
I want to talk a little bit about the original reason or purpose for tariffs.
Mhm.
Originally, tariffs back in the 1700s were put onto imports into the U.S. And that was before the establishment of federal income tax in 1913. So tariffs were the primary source of revenue for the U.S. government. Just seems incredible that the entire government could be reliant on just import tariffs to run the entire government. But that's the way it was until 1913 when income tax came into the picture and we started being dependent on income tax to run the government.
Mhm.
Initially, the idea was to protect domestic industries by putting tariffs on imported goods, which would make our domestic products seem more competitive and encourage the growth of local industries. But today, that's all turned around. It's upside down. Today, tariffs are not a major source of revenue for the U.S.
Mhm.
They're a very small percentage of our overall government budget. And their primary purpose today is related to trade negotiations, retaliatory measures, and a way of achieving the federal government's goals. So tariffs have completely changed in the way we think about them and what they're used for, and they have significant economic impact. And let me show you an example of where that impact happened. So this is Smoot Hawley. You probably heard about this. It's
Right.
often mentioned with in relationship to tariffs.
Right.
This is Senator Smoot and Representative Hawley. This was in the late 1920s and 1930. They implemented tariffs, protectionist tariffs on U.S. imports, about 20% on most items that were being imported into the U.S. So they fought hard for this and felt that tariffs were the way to go and that it would exclude imports that were competitive with U.S. manufacturing. Most of the economists during that time opposed the tariffs. They said it's not a good idea. It's going to make everything more expensive. It would cause recessions and so forth. But President Herbert Hoover signed the Tariff Act anyway. Many countries retaliated with their own tariff policies, particularly Canada and Mexico. Does that sound familiar?
Ironically.
Yeah, I know. I know. Looking at the history, it's, history repeats itself. And the tariffs were commonly blamed for severely deepening the global Great Depression. So, not just in the US, but worldwide. It had a recessionary and then depression effect on the whole world. It also did significant foreign policy damage. So, where we had friendly relationships, they were no longer friendly. We had a long road ahead to try to get that repaired.
Mm.
Okay, so what's the current state of our tariffs in America today? And this is as of this morning. So I got to put that disclaimer on it because you never know if there's going to be a tweet or an announcement or a change or just, it's an extremely volatile environment right now.
Mhm.
But essentially, there are reciprocal tariffs on 90 countries. Altogether in the world, there are about 168 countries, but the 90 and the top are the ones that we trade with the most.
Mhm.
Now, those tariffs, reciprocal tariffs, meaning that if a country has a tariff of 25%, then we're going to put a tariff of 25% on. So it's, tariffs on both countries at the same rate.
Right.
Those reciprocal tariffs are on pause for 90 days. I think there was a lot of backlash after they were announced, and as a result, there is a pause on those. But essentially, here they are. The top ones, 25% on Canada and Mexico, 20% on the European Union, 10% on the United Kingdom, 145% on China. And that's the only exception. That 145% is current and being charged on Chinese imports. 46% on Vietnam, 24% on Japan, 32 on Taiwan, and 0 on Russia. So that raised a lot of eyebrows. But the thinking was that there are other existing sanctions, so we didn't need to put a tariff on Russia. There are various rates on other countries as well. As I mentioned, there's about 168 countries in the world, so there's various rates on others. And there are some exemptions. So goods entered under USMCA, that's the trade agreement between Mexico, the US, and Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So if you qualify for a product that is the growth or manufacture in Mexico, the US, or Canada, there's still a free trade agreement in between the three countries if you qualify. And that means duty-free entry amongst the countries.
Okay.
Pharmaceuticals are also exempted, semiconductors and critical materials, critical minerals.
Wow.
All other exemptions on the 2018 tariffs expired or will expire on May 31st. There's now a 25% across the board tariff on all cars, all automobiles coming into the US from all countries. That's effective April 2nd. Their elimination of de minimis. So many of you may be importing goods under the de minimis claim. That means that if the product is less than $800, it comes in duty-free and essentially bypasses the formal import process. And this was a really interesting thing that was put into effect about 10 years ago based on the amount of e-commerce coming across the border. So in order to facilitate e-commerce, because we were buying so many things like Halloween costumes and Christmas decorations and all sorts of consumer products, but also industrial products that were low cost. And because of that, this $800 maximum value was placed on imports. So if you had something less than $800, it would come in under de minimis. That is changing. As of May 2nd, de minimis is completely eliminated.
Oh.
Which is going to be really making U.S. Customs crazy because they import 3.8 million small packages per day. So they have to accommodate now. All the workers have to be able to facilitate and be able to go with 3.8 million, process all these packages. There are also special imports on aluminum and steel. Those are subject to a penalty tariff called 232, and they've been around since 2018. And those rates are 15% plus the new reciprocal tariff. So if you're importing aluminum, say from China, you have 145% plus 25% or plus 15% on aluminum.
Wow.
There's also a proposed port fees on all Chinese ships unloading at American ports. And about 98% of the ships that are coming to American ports are made in China. So that's going to be a big hit also on that regard. So that's what it is as of today. What it is going forward, we'll see. Okay, so we worked on a project where we asked 18 senior executives, mostly at the C-level, all across America, 16 different industries, what are they going to do about the tariffs? So not just what are the tariffs, but what are they actually going to do? And here's some of the results. Here's the industries that that these executives belong to, and you can see it's quite a swath there, from
Range, absolutely.
semiconductors, medical devices, power generation, freight forwarding, engineering, machining, printing, all of these kind of industries. And the locations were upstate New York, New York City, Toronto, Maine, Minneapolis, Silicon Valley, Santa Monica, and
Mhm.
San Diego. Probably the biggest thing of note was almost all of the people that we talked to said their capital investments and hiring are frozen. They're not making any decisions. They're not investing anywhere. They're not hiring any people until the economic outlook stabilizes. So even though most of the companies are planning alternate approaches to what to do about the tariffs, they are not hiring or executing on any of those plans
Got
right now, which is to me a big red flag that we're headed into a
it.
recession. The other thing that I think is important here, and that's the second bullet from the bottom, is
Mhm.
that almost all of the companies said they were working to increase domestic sourcing.
Okay.
So, trying to find American manufacturers or develop suppliers in the US that could provide parts for goods. Some of the companies are completely stuck, didn't know what to do. Others were modeling alternate strategies, such as moving to a different location, moving manufacturing out of China and into a different location, keeping an eye on the geopolitical risks, but especially the semiconductor industry.
Right.
As you probably know, most of our semiconductors are made at TSMC in Taiwan.
One,
That's
right.
the semiconductor manufacturing company, TSMC. They
Mhm.
make about 95% of the semiconductors. So, watching that, especially with respect to China and Taiwan, and what may happen there. I guess I would say what will happen there.
Right.
I think it's just a matter of time that China will take over Taiwan. And if that's the case, then we may have issues trying to get supplies from there. And then finally, the strategies are C-level decisions. So to move manufacturing to another location, these executives are considering that, and they are the ones who will make the decision. So, what products should be considered for reshoring? What products are coming back now? Starting under the previous administration, there was funding available for semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and then we also saw growth in plastics.
Oh,
So, a lot of the industries sort of started with a trickle coming back. The Reshoring Institute's been around for 11 years. So we've been doing reshoring work for a long time, a long time. This is not new to us. And so we've seen, sort of a steady growth in companies reconsidering America as a place to source and manufacture. And so these are the top industries that we've seen coming back. And what products are likely to stay foreign made? Well, apparel and footwear, electronics assembly, toys, and high touch products. Just a fun fact about toys, there is no other country in the world that buys as many toys as the US. We by far outstrip any other country in terms of toy acquisition.
really?
Yeah, and about 95% of the toys are made in China. And high touch products. So if you look at the pictures on the right,
Mhm.
this is a athletic shoe factory that I visited in China,
Mhm.
and there were thousands of people sitting at sewing machines sewing the uppers on your athletic shoes.
Mhm.
So they're stitched together on the uppers, and then the base or the soles. If you turn your athletic shoe over, you can see there are a lot of different color squares and patterns and so forth. Each of those little squares are placed and glued by hand, and then they go through a heat treat system that sort of melts everything together. But the amount of labor was quite astonishing. I mean, it's very labor intensive to make an athletic shoe. very little automation. It's mostly laborers working. So if you have a product that has a high labor content like that,
Right.
let's say, for example, you're making men's shirts or you're buying men's shirts, uh, those shirts are produced in a sewing factory and there's lots of labor involved in sewing that shirt. But if you're making the textiles
Mm.
that produce the fabric for those shirts, that's fully automated.
Automated process. Right.
So with little labor and a fully automated factory, you have lots of options. You don't have to worry about the labor costs as a big percentage of your costs. So you can operate anywhere. There's lots of, for example, textile factories in North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia. But the sewing factories are almost all overseas where the labor is very cheap. So one of the first things to do is when you're sourcing is to consider how much labor goes into that product
Right.
and then look for sources in a likely location. So if you're looking for sewn products or small assembly electronics, it's likely to be somewhere overseas or in Mexico.
Mhm.
Then, one of the other strategies that we heard was building inventory, to build up of inventory in case the tariffs go up or change again, which is a short-term strategy, but it also involves investment in a lot of working capital. So it's kind of a careful balance there. And then redeveloping a supply base in the U.S. And we always tell our clients it can take you up to 18 months to find suppliers and develop them. And that's because as manufacturing moved overseas, all the suppliers did too.
Right.
So we've lost a lot of skills and automation and so forth. So it takes a while, probably 18 months to redevelop. Then if you look in the blue box, we got a lot of quotes when we were doing this study. And here it says we're asking our Chinese suppliers to give us a discount of at least 50% of the tariffs.
Wow.
So that's what they were asking, but I'm like, oh, that's interesting because if you have a 145% tariff, that means that 70% or 72% or so would be the Chinese responsibility and the other half the US responsibility. So I don't know. That's an interesting ask. I don't know whether
You'd have to be carrying a lot of margin to make that work.
yeah. The other thing that we heard was one of our contacts in Silicon Valley. This is where I live, and I know a senior executive in procurement, and she told me that a lot of their Asian suppliers are coming to them to ask to change the Incoterms from delivered duty paid to ex works.
Oh,
Meaning that the U.S. importer would be then responsible for customs duties.
right.
And so we'll see how that works out too. She said so far they had not agreed to any of that.
Not so.
So, point is, lots of change ahead, lots of things to worry about, lots of stuff to consider changing and finding in different locations. And I wish I had a good strategy to offer you, but I think there are multiple strategies and different things that can be done as a result.
That's absolutely incredible. Some of the images brought back some memories. I once upon a time, a lifetime ago, I worked in what was touted to be the largest machine shop in the United States in Torrance, California. And of course, it's no longer there.
Yeah.
And and the stuff that was made there is definitely no longer made in the United States. So that hit a little bit close to home. But thank you so much, Rosemary. I mean, obviously, this is top of mind for a lot of different industries, for a lot of different executives all across the board, because everybody uses something that is made somewhere other than here. Um, so this first question, the answer might be obvious, but I think it bears asking. Global tariffs would you say they've shifted the cost benefit analysis of offshoring versus reshoring in general?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly they put more consideration. I guess there's more cost, and so
Right.
you have to look at the costs and evaluate that to determine what's the best approach. obviously the tariffs are a tax on imports, so you have to pay that tax. I mean, you're kind of stuck.
You can't escape it. So,
It's inescapable. That's
right.
exactly right. So yeah, I mean, there's going to be a consideration to think about it. I think the reshoring trend overall, though, has been around for a while. We've been, as I mentioned, we established in 2014, so
Mhm.
we've been here around for 11 years. And during that period of time, there's been a fairly robust interest in reshoring.
Mhm.
Uh, I would say that most companies are at least considering it or trying to figure it out. The problem was there was a misalignment between purchasing departments and the C-level executives. The executives might have this idea about reshoring
Right.
and think it's a good idea and think we should go in that direction, but the purchasing department is charged with saving money. And
Right.
so you've got a disconnect there, and until you get the CEOs to say, oh, it's okay to spend more if it's a domestic product, then
Right.
you're just not going to see much results.
Now, with that in mind, and obviously people come to you for advice about reshoring, and this is an area of specialization for you. What frameworks or methodologies do you recommend just for evaluating whether reshoring is really a viable strategy? As you said, just having a brainstorm and saying, bring everything back on shore, that, it sounds easy.
Yeah,
Uh,
that isn't going to happen.
it's not, it doesn't work that way. Okay.
Yeah, we actually have a book. It's called the Reshoring Guidebook, which goes through the step-by-step methodology for a reshoring project. But I think in general, it's first of all, it's fundamental to understand the cost structure of the product you're trying to buy.
Mhm.
So is it heavily labor intensive? Are you buying an assembled electronic product or something, or is it manufactured with automation? And that's really fundamental to knowing where to go to look for potential opportunities. Like I said, if you're sewing men's shirts,
Gonna have a tough time.
it's not coming back.
Right.
You might see some high-end brands that are manufacturing in the U.S., but if you go to Target or Walmart or somewhere, the shirts that are there are not ever going to be back in the U.S. It's because we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the labor that is willing to sit on a plastic stool for 12 hours a day
Right.
and sew arms and on sleeves. I mean, or sew sleeves onto the bodice of the shirt.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's just, and the same with electronics manufacturing, and the same with picking strawberries. I mean, Americans don't want those jobs, and they're likely not to come back or be available for Americans. And I don't think Americans would take those jobs. So that's one thing. The
Mhm.
other thing is the massive amount of manufacturing requires a massive amount of power. And we do
Mm.
not have the power infrastructure in the US. I mean, right now we're struggling with to support data centers
Right.
under with AI is requiring such a spike in power requirements. There's no way we could power all those manufacturing plants. So it's the kind of work that we don't want. And the other thing about that is if you put people to work and don't pay a living wage, like in a factory, you have to supplement their income with welfare. And we don't want to create a welfare state, right? What we want to come back are the high end jobs that are more sophisticated, more skillful, and they pay a better wage for the workers.
There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of considerations. It's not just,
Absolutely.
snap of the fingers. Now, you had mentioned procurement teams and the desire of the C-suite to say, let's make this happen. So you have arguably rising inflation, you have geopolitical instability. How can procurement teams then balance cost containment with the need for sourcing new resilient suppliers in this context?
Well, I think the good news is there's so much information out there, and it's obvious that we're in a tariff situation now. I mean, everybody knows that. CEOs know that. They're going to understand that the costs are going to go up. So it does give the procurement personnel an opportunity to look at what alternatives are there and do an honest comparison between the price of an overseas source together with the tariff rates and versus a domestic source. And that's where I think we'll find there's some favorable decisions that can be made for U.S. sourcing. And that's really, I think that's the interim step. I don't see, quite frankly, I don't see all this manufacturing coming back. I mean, there's
Right.
people not beating the path to the manufacturing store in the U.S., but we do see a lot of domestic sourcing. So companies that are attempting to maybe increase domestic sourcing by 10% or so, which
Right.
will considerably fuel the U.S. economy. But then you got to balance that with the power generation, with the available workforce. I mean, workforce availability is another big issue. I mean, we have lots of open jobs in the U.S. and no workers. So,
It's this is it's unprecedented time. I mean, so when it comes to reshoring, because we're talking about maybe finding some domestic sources, how do you approach the challenge of identifying and vetting high quality domestic suppliers, just in the first place?
yeah, I think there's not much difference in previous ways that you would approach vetting a supplier and what it's like today. You still want to look at their long-term track record, their get some references from clients, look at their financials, understand, try first article parts and see if they can meet the quality specifications. These are all things that you would commonly do for a supplier, no
For
matter
any,
where they are
yeah,
in the world, right? And I think
absolutely.
that's important. One other thing, though, I did read something over the weekend where there's a spike in cyber crimes with new suppliers that are not being that are not being carefully vetted. This was a issue that we had during the pandemic also. I think the cyber crimes increased by 600% during the pandemic, and we're starting to see that again. So these small suppliers don't have the security on their systems. They don't have the staffing to look for cybercrime, and that's going to become an issue too. So that's another thing to evaluate.
Absolutely. This is almost like a parade of all my past lives. So another past life was in the world of procurement, and and the idea about switching suppliers, any new supplier relationship is actually a risk decision. I
Yeah.
don't know what your track record is, so I have to investigate. I'm establishing new criteria, so it's having that happen in the midst of this tremendous pressure and the need for immediate results is quite challenging. You'd mentioned you talked to a number of CEOs, and I'm curious to know what the common shoring misconceptions are, and what do you see supply chain leaders believing to be, the magic answer to how to reshore, and how do they address that in their strategic planning?
I think, a lot of the people we talked to were kind of surprised, thinking that things were going to go along fairly normally. There would be maybe a small increase in the tariffs and so forth. So, 145% tariff is just jaw dropping in terms of cost.
It
So,
is.
what these executives were telling us is they kind of don't know what to do. We had, I think, about 72% of them said they were going to pass on the additional costs to customers, which means, your prices are going to increase, right?
Right. You take a 200% increase in the cost of that's
Yeah, and then another maybe 60% said they would try to absorb some of the costs, so there's going to be some of that as well. But there's no question about it. The prices are going to increase, and maybe they'll be comparable to U.S. suppliers at some point. But considering that the price of sourcing in China has been for the last 25 years really low, I mean, these are low cost vendors for sure. And now, to take a hit like that, 100% or 145% increase in potentially the cost is going to be hard to swallow, and for sure going to be resulting in inflation.
I think it's in the title, low cost country sourcing, so it's kind of a tough one to combat. Now, obviously, doing nothing is not necessarily an option for an organization that wants to survive. And so, what would you say, some practical resources are that you'd recommend for a procurement team that's starting to develop reshoring strategies? Because sooner or later, you're going to have to make a decision and do something. And I would imagine you give this advice all the time.
Yeah, so one of the things that we tell everybody that we work with is you need to have multiple plans. So you need a plan A, plan B, plan C. And that doesn't mean just thinking about it and saying, well, we'll go to Mexico or, so, I mean, you need to have a solid plan. Who are the suppliers in that location? Are they being vetted in the background so that if you have to move or decide to move in that direction, you already have some of the work done? You
Right.
also need to have, you need to think about the budget. So not only the cost comparison, but are you going to have travel expense? Are you going to are you going to have extra expense for qualification for a QA? These kind of things. I think procurement professionals have to take a step up and start thinking more strategically instead of just where can they find the part and qualify it and buy it. Now you got to think about the geopolitical situation, the import process. That's the other thing that I would recommend is if you're not already talking to your customs broker,
Mhm.
you should be. I would highly recommend that purchasing people introduce themselves to their customs broker, understand who they are, ask questions, and so forth, because those brokers are the ones that are going to know when there are changes to the tariff rates
Right.
or potentially how you reclassify your goods for import, which may make them cheaper. So if you
Mhm.
reclassify something at a 20% rate down to a 10% rate, that's going to make a difference.
Absolutely.
You need to make sure they understand the description of a part, and as parts change, the descriptions may change. So if you have an engineering change or something, you may be able to reclassify that part at a lower tariff rate. So you got to make your customs broker your friend and make sure you know them. I would suggest maybe the purchasing department should have a big meeting or a training session with the
Absolutely.
broker and try to learn about each other's jobs. And I think that would be very helpful.
That is awesome. And it gives the idea of supply chain agility a whole new dimension now, just
Yeah.
more elements. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that this information is current as of this morning. And so the next question I ask you might seem a little bit amusing in that context. Looking ahead, how do you see the next 5 years unfolding as far as global versus local sourcing strategies?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I've spent so much time, watching what's happening each morning.
Exactly. Our
um,
time horizons have shifted now.
yeah, I think we're going to see an increase in domestic sourcing.
Mhm.
Probably a small bump in manufacturing, although I don't think it's, going to be very big. Over the next 5 years, I think we're going to see a significant increase in price of products that you're buying and the price that we're selling our products at. I think, the geopolitics are an ongoing issue. And, while it may seem like it's far away in Washington where people are dealing with geopolitics, it often trickles down to our very jobs in
Absolutely.
our particular area because the geopolitics are going to affect suppliers around the world. So,
Yeah,
it just seems to me um, that procurement professionals have to start thinking strategically, which is not that easy to do. I mean, you have to kind of step out of the day-to-day tactics. I have to place 10 orders today
Mhm.
to what's happening in the world and where should I think about trying to source and
Absolutely.
what are the risks involved in sourcing in a new country. And, these are the kind of things that are going to expand the profession. So professionals need to have a broader view, but are also going to be difficult and more complicated, adding different dimensions to their current jobs.
Absolutely. Well, this has been incredible, and absolutely enlightening. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I hope this was helpful and insightful. I want to give a big thanks to Rosemary for being with us and sharing her expertise with us. If this was of interest to you, I encourage you to check out Reshoring Institute and their robust library of research and resources I'm going to make sure I get this right. It's one word. It's reshoringinstitute.org.
Correct.
And for all things procurement, obviously, you can check out the Supplier Gateway platform. We have lots of solutions at suppliergateway.com. This was an incredible conversation. I'm hoping we have more as things evolve and develop. But I'd like to thank you so much, Rosemary, for spending time with us today, and looking forward to, you know, I wouldn't say better news or worse news, but just, more stability and maybe the possibility of really better grappling the evolution of how our manufacturing landscape looks like in the United States. So thank you so much, Rosemary.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.